When I made the video on the harvesting technique that I'm experimenting with on the grafts, I collected around 40 grams fresh material using just the outer green flesh. And from the 40 grams fresh, dried, it was around almost 3 grams, 2.75 grams. And I've always read about an older German paper where the authors tested the alkaloid content using a spectrometer and a different process, but I've never had access to the paper itself, and we would just read the excerpt on a few different forums, and I've posted about it over the years. But recently I did get access to it, and I used an AI translator to translate to English, and it just included a bit more information, but the excerpt was indeed correct, and it states that grafted Lophophorus have the same content as, or have the same alkaloid profile as own root cactus Lophophora, and greenhouse grown Lophophora have the same potency as wild grown Lophophora as well. And with the grafted Lophophora, in my experience from a few different extraction experiments and just testing in general over the years, is the main factor seems to be the actual age of the graft itself. So a fresh pup, I've harvested 100 grams fresh and extracted it, and it only yielded 10 milligrams, so it was maybe 0.1% yield, which is extremely low. So I just gave up on extraction in general, but I came back to the idea of using the older flesh, which is the idea of the harvesting style. And I tested the dry material using my daily caapi tea and see if it provided a spiritual experience with a very low dose. The main reason that it would be sustainable and I can use it in my personal practice. So a while back I got around to having some free time, and I dosed 1 gram dried from the almost 3 grams. I dosed 1 gram dry Lophophorus flesh with around 250 milligram harmalas teas, which is what I take daily, and I'm pretty comfortable with the effects, and I don't have any negative side effects. So within 15 minutes of chewing and ingesting the skins, I felt fairly cold, and my hands were very cold as well, and I had nausea from just the bad bitterness from chewing the skins. 25 minutes after taking it, the cold effect didn't go away, and I suspected it was the pelletine. In the past, I dosed a non-peyote plant. I tested the corici, and I tested a very low dose without harmalas, since the main alkaloid isn't mescaline, it's actually pelletine. And the effects were fairly similar to what I remember from that experience. But in general, I felt happy, I felt good, state of well-being. But there was no euphoria, which is what's common with mescaline, but it was still pretty early in the trip, and usually it takes a while, maybe 90 minutes, to start feeling the effects of mescaline. 30 minutes after dosing, I still had a cold feeling in my body and my hands. So it's definitely an effect of the peyote skins, and it's not just like a placebo effect or my mind playing games. But on the plus side, I didn't feel any sleepiness or like heavy body effects similar to how I had on the Corisi flesh. After an hour, overall I felt pretty good. The nausea came in waves and it would come and go. And there was a slight body high or body feeling that I was experiencing. It felt like I was under blankets and someone was pulling the blanket from the top of my head like a veil. And the effect was fairly strong, but there was no psychological effects that I could perceive at the moment. And the colors in my vision, everything seemed a little bit different. It wasn't extremely pronounced, but there was a difference in my visual perception. At the 1 hour 20 minute mark, I still had the cold feeling in my body, but in general it wasn't a negative feeling. I felt pretty good. The nausea kept coming and going in waves, and there was no euphoria like I mentioned, but it felt pretty significant that I wrote this down. I had a very strong feeling of being happy or being excited to be alive. Again, it wasn't euphoria, it was just an overall strong feeling of being happy to be alive in general. It seemed pretty strange at the time. I wasn't feeling bad or anything, and I can't really complain about my life, but it was a fairly strong feeling that I had of being grateful. So at the 1 hour 40 minute mark, I went to the bathroom and I got a chance to look in the mirror. My pupils were fairly dilated and my hands still felt very cold. But again, I didn't have any negative feelings. Overall, I felt pretty good. At the 2 hour mark, I pretty much noticed it would just stick to the threshold effects. My vision felt pretty focused, like in general it feels like a tunnel vision where I could focus on one thing in particular, but the rest seems to blur out in the background, and still no euphoria. And color seemed a little bit brighter, which would make sense since my pupils were quite dilated. At the 2 hour 20 minute mark, colors in general were very saturated, and something I didn't experience before is I had a vibration effect. It was like usually on stronger doses of tea and with cacti, I would have like a waving texture or a breathing effect, which is fairly common with some psychedelics. But I had just a vibration, like everything was shaking a bit. It was the first time I've had that vision, and like I mentioned before, the tunnel vision got pretty strong. My peripheral vision seemed like very shot. I felt like a horse where you can only focus on what's in front of you. At the 3 hour mark, I jotted down I had HD vision. I guess it's just that everything was saturated and focused, but there was no psychological effects that I could perceive. In general, it was just an overall state of well-being. There was no strong euphoria, which is common. And at this time, I felt that the peak effects were already reached, and I just had shorter and weaker waves of this overall feeling of wellness and some slight visual disturbance. The effects were very mild, but I did take note that like the outside world didn't seem to matter anymore. It was only what I was doing at the time, and the focus was pretty strong as well. And for my next attempt in the future, I plan to take the rest of the dried flesh, which would be a 75% increase at the dose that I took for this experience report. One thing that I did notice a few days afterwards, and it's still persisting to today, that I've never really had closed-eyed visuals, but after this experience, even completely sober, I am having closed-eyed visuals. It's nothing strong, but it is quite noticeable when I close my eyes. In general, I do have a very I can easily enter a trance in meditation, and I get like a roller coaster effect usually when I start sitting in meditation, where it feels like I'm being lunged forward very rapidly, like I'm on a roller coaster. And during this trance phase that I get, I'm almost constantly getting closed-eyed visuals, which honestly never has happened before. Even on Psychotria and DMT with MAOI, I've very rarely had closed-eyed visuals. And even now, like almost a month after this experience, I did have like this lifting of that blockage. I don't know if it's positive or negative, but I did notice that I have closed-eyed visuals frequently now, even when I'm completely sober. So it's just something that I thought was worth sharing. And after this experience with the 1 gram dried skins, I remembered a character on the forums online. She presented herself as Anna Holium, which was the original name given to peyote by the discoverers. And she would always seemingly rub everyone the wrong way. She seemed a bit egotistical and didn't accept criticism, and spoke in a weird phrasing, like a kind of like a Riddler tone to her postings. But she would always post and push the idea of hydroponic periscopicus grafts, and she would always go on about how they were just as strong as, she would say, dirt or shit-grown Lophophorus. And I found that interesting going through the old posts that I didn't have many interactions with her, but that was the beginning of my identification and growing cacti in general. It was the beginning of my hobby back in 2012 and 2014. But she would always post about that and how like these are the best things to do and everyone should do this. But she went about it in a weird way, and she would never post or give any experience or any proof to her claims. After a while, after researching, there was some posts about this paper that I mentioned in German, but I don't know, it just came off weird at the time. But after this experience, I'm pretty sure she was right. it's weird going back and seeing all her posts. She did go about it a weird way, since she would do it under grow lights. Everything was in test tubes, and it just felt like a lot of work. And the one thing I don't agree is, like I mentioned, I think age. The age of the graft is what's most important versus the biomass, since there's a lot of water weight with the graft itself. So yeah, after this experience, I had like a flashback to my early postings, and I remembered Anna on all of the forums and how she would just push on and push on about hydroponic grafts being the next wave or the new age. But she was like a real character. She had quite a few bans from just like trolling everyone, and she even threatened to crash, I think, Shroomery or DDoS the site, and just something I remembered from the older internet before everyone became compartmentalized with Facebook and different posting styles. I just thought it was something worth sharing to everyone that remembered from those days, or even if you're a more recent grower, you can always go through the old posts that are on forums, see how she would go about her ideas.